Welcome to a new episode of TTG Conversations 5 Questions video series. I'm Karen Yu, Group Editor of TTG Asia Media. In this episode, we will find out how ready are the Chinese to get back to travel for business and events. And taking us through this topic is George Cao, co-founder and CEO of Dragon Trail International. Now, Dragon Trail is a marketing solutions company with roots in China and has extensive experience in the global travel and MICE industry. George leads the team with more than 20 years of experience in travel and technology in China and in the US. Happy to have you on the show, George.
Thank you, Karen. It's great to be here.
I've got 5 questions for you, and here's the first. Now, Dragon Trail has a huge, deep understanding of the Chinese outbound travel market, and your researchers have been tracking the Chinese travel sentiments throughout the travel freeze. Can you tell us how these travelers are feeling about international travel now compared to the height of the pandemic in 2020 and also last year?
Sure, for sure. We conducted 4 consumer sentiment research in 2020 and 2021 in March and September of each year. We saw the sentiment change primarily as the pandemic developed. In our March 2020 survey, nobody knows, what the pandemic will be like. And people were thinking maybe this is like SARS in 2003, it's going to go away in a few months. And the sentiment at that point was relatively positive. But as we moved into the second half of 2020, as the pandemic started to erupt in outside of China and seemed to be a little bit out of control, the sentiment really hit the rock bottom. As 2021 rolled around, in the beginning of 2021, in our March 2021 survey, the sentiment bounced back somewhat because of the domestic control of the virus was relatively successful. And the flare-ups was not as frequent as of late 2021 and as it is now. So the sentiment was relatively positive in the first half of 2021. And then as the flare-ups start to be more frequent, the sentiment started to come down a little bit by the end of 2021. But overall, I think the traveler sentiment remains to be pretty positive. I just give you one figure from our research. Based on our last research in 2021, 55% of outbound travelers or potential outbound travelers already have a destination in mind for their next international travel. That's a pretty good indication, right? That's showing you people have been thinking about outbound travel and they are planning for outbound travel already. And of those people, 17% already have a date in mind. So I don't know how reliable they can count on those dates, but they're planning. So I think by the end of 2021, we're seeing a pretty strong demand for outbound travel. The desire is there. Right? What really is preventing or suppressing this demand is really the government policies, primarily in China, but also in some destination countries that prevents people from, taking a trip freely. Hopefully that situation will change in the coming months.
And are the improving traveler sentiments as well as the gradual removal of international border restrictions around the world helping to shape a better Chinese outbound travel performance projection? What is your company's forecast for the outbound tourism recovery for China?
So I think one of the important factors that's driving changes, that will be driving changes in China, are the policies of Western governments in dealing with the coronavirus, right? The Chinese netizens call the policies of those countries 躺平. In English, it means lying down, or it means giving up completely, right? So that has kind of generated a lot of debate on the social media in China. So among the public, should we take a lying down approach, or should we still take a zero COVID approach? So a lot of lively debate on social media among the public. As far as the government is concerned, I think they're thinking about, the pressure will be on them, especially the foreign markets are showing strong recovery, both tourism-wise and economic-wise. And the pressure will be higher when the results start to come out as kind of indication of the success of the lying down policy. But we know for a fact that the government have said they're not going to take a straight lying down or giving up approach. There will be something of a Chinese way of living with the virus. What that will look like is really difficult for us to say at this point. As the pandemic evolved over time, fewer and fewer people dare to make forecasts anymore. I think the two remaining brave ones in China, one is James Liang, the CEO or chairman of Trip.com group, right? James had made a prediction earlier this year or late last year to say that the outbound travel will start to open up by June of this year and will get to a fairly robust recovery by 2023. So that's one opinion. I think that's from a very credible industry executive. The second opinion came from China Tourism Academy. And they have predicted that in 2022, tourism volume or revenue from China outbound travel will recover back to about 25% of 2019 levels. So that is really telling us that the recovery will be gradual. It's not going to be opening up all of a sudden. It's going to be gradual, and it's going to take some time for the whole market to recover. And it's very likely we're going to go through some travel bubbles with select markets and select countries first, right? No matter which forecast you believe, I think a good lead indicator will be how China will open up with Hong Kong without quarantine on either direction, right? So if you're watching this market and you're looking for ways to kind of get a good sense of when China is opening up, I think watch how China is going to open up with Hong Kong. As soon as that happens, I think you should start to really, really prepare for your own opening. But before that happens, I think you still have time, to prepare and think and get ready.
Okay, and how does that travel sentiments translate to outbound for Chinese events and business travel?
That's a very good question. I think, of our sentiment surveys, they're primarily leisure travel focused. So we don't have hard data to make any assertions on business travel. Now, that being said, we're planning a research with a business travel and MICE expert to conduct a sentiment survey on business travel and MICE. So this will hopefully be, coming out in a couple of months. So we'll start to get some real numbers about business travel and MICE. With that said, I think there are two factors that are at play for business travel. One is in the short term, there's a lot of suppressed demand for travel. A lot of the business people haven't seen their partners, haven't met their partners for a long time, either at conferences or individual visits, sales calls, and things like that. So there's a lot of suppressed demand. I think as soon as the quarantine policy changes and you don't have to quarantine for 2-3 weeks when you come back to China, there will be a surge in business travel, just simply because the suppressed demand in the short term. I think that's the first factor at play. The second factor at play, I think, is the longer term implications on the changes, during the pandemic, as far as communication is concerned, as far as habits forming is concerned. I think what that implication is going to have a fairly significant impact on non-essential travel. I think businesses are going to be controlling their travel budget tighter for non-essential travel. For essential travel, I think the must-go events, there will be no question; those will continue. All the must-do sales calls, those will happen. No question about it. It might even increase. But for non-essential travel, so these are the events you kind of sort of can go, or you hesitate. Maybe it doesn't make much sense. Those demand will go away. I think those will be replaced by Zoom calls or by hybrid events and things like that. I think how those two factors will balance out over the longer term, I don't really know. I think I'm also waiting for our business travel and MICE research to come out to get better ideas on how that is going to shape up.
Pre-pandemic, destinations used to welcome massive incentive travel movements with upwards of 1,000 delegates per event. Will these return as China eases outbound and returning restrictions?
I think it's hard to say, but as a general rule of thumb, I think the frequency and size of big group travel, including those incentive travel, will come down. And the most obvious reason is the risks associated with managing a lot of people and taking responsibility for their health and well-being, right? So I think that trend is also consistent with our research and research from a lot of other organizations. The faster increase of FIT travel and the slower increase of group travel. So based on all of our kind of sentiment research, family travel and small group travel are preferred way of traveling. Instead of going to a big group, either incentive group or tour groups. So I think that's going to be a trend that is agreed by most observers of the China outbound travel market, or even domestic travel for that matter. So FIT travel, small group travel will be strong, I think, post-pandemic. Large group travels will still be there, but it depends a lot on the international situation when it comes to the pandemic, right? If the virus goes away completely, we might see a return of big group travel and big incentive travel. But if we're, are forced to live with the virus, so to speak, I think that limits the potential for the growth in big group travel and the big incentive travel groups.
And how should destinations as well as travel and business event specialists prepare for the return of the Chinese travel market?
I think before the market opens, this is a great time to have a review of all of your infrastructure, digital infrastructure, service infrastructure, right? To see if they're up to date, to see if there are opportunities you can improve some of that. This is a good time to do that. Well, this is the downtime. This is also a good time for us to take advantage of, the downtime to make improvements on our infrastructure. We've done some training for international destinations, Singapore included, for the local tour guides, right? How do you better receive the Chinese tourists when they come back? Can you be better prepared? Can you better serve them when the market opens up? I think that's the first thing that destinations should do. I think, secondly, it's also a good time to refresh your database and to update or refresh your relationships with your partners in China. Some of them are still around. Some of them are maybe have gone out of business. But even for the businesses who are still around, there might have been turnovers and significant turnovers. So it's a good idea to get in touch with them virtually at the moment, either by organizing webinars, virtual training sessions, or one-on-one calls like this, right? So I think it's a good idea to refresh the database and make sure the relationships are still there. And if you need to develop new relationships do that. This is a good time, to do, some of that work. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing a lot of destinations running, virtual or hybrid trade shows and road shows. And the purpose for most of these activities are to refresh the database and to maintain the relationships. And I think the last but not least is there are some opportunities to do some consumer research. Consumer attitudes, consumer behavior have changed. And you might have seen some of the research from third-party reports like our sentiment survey, or the reports from WTCF, WTA, C-Trip, Chungyou, etc. But those are generic. Those are market research, right? They're not specific to your destination. They're not specific to your target segment. I think it's a good idea to take this opportunity, this downtime, to conduct some research towards your the market segment that are most relevant to you, to your destination, and look at the market segment that are kind of been traveling to your destination, and see if there are any changes, source market wise, demographic wise, and all those things, infrastructure refreshment, database refreshment, and also consumer research will help destinations to get ready as soon as you see Hong Kong is opening without quarantine. I think it's time for you to get into action.
Very good tips there, very good takeaways. Thank you so much for your time, George.
Thank you, Karen, for giving me this opportunity to talk to you.
Past and future episodes of TTG Conversations 5 Questions can be found on the TTG YouTube channel. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.